When the board was putting together our agenda, this idea of regenerative is around us all of the time now in the farming community, and not necessarily always in an organic a perspective or setting. And so really one of the things that we were asking ourselves is regenerative agriculture an opportunity or a threat for organics? And I think, the truth always lies somewhere in the middle. When you're looking at regenerative, I always think that there are two ways of looking at that term, right? There's, from my perspective, a regenerative narrative, which to me is kind of like the conventional world's equivalent to natural. It's like, how can we dress this up as something else, continue to do the practices that we've already done, but make it seem like we're doing something different? So I think that there's that narrative that's out there. And then there's the agronomic practices, like crop rotation, the use of cover crops, reduced tillage, compost application, incorporating livestock. And I think that in the organic community, many of you are already doing that in your practice, right? So for me, some of the conversation in the organic community is, how do we talk more about what we're doing than what we're not doing? Like no pesticides, no GMOs, no herbicides, no nitrogen fertilizer, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. So I think that is part of what this next conversation will be about. So what we decided to do was to invite the executive director of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, Elizabeth Whitlow, and Stuart McMillan, who is the farm manager at Legend Organic Farms, and Jason Freeman, who is the CEO and founder of Farmer Direct Organics, to have a conversation and do a bit of a presentation about what this new regenerative organic certification is about and the benefits that it can bring. And I think that there's also some tension there about, do we need another certification? And I'm hoping that the presentations will help answer that question and talk a little bit about what it's like to actually implement this on your farm. That will be Stuart. And then Jason will be talking a little bit about what that market looks like, because there's no point in growing something if you can't sell it. So those are our three next presenters, and I'd like to invite them all onto the stage and join me. And I will pass it over them to have the conversation.
So what we're going to do, I'm going to just talk to you briefly about the Regenerative Organic Alliance, who we are, what we've created with the Regenerative Organic Certified Program, and just a few highlights of what we're doing. And then we're going to move on to Stuart, one of our fearless farmers, who's been with us since our pilot days. And then we're going to move to Jason with Farmers Direct Organic to talk about the ways he's bringing the Regenerative Organic Certified crops to market. So I'm just going to scoot over so I can see this. And first off, I just flew in yesterday from Northern California, and it's really beautiful here. I'm glad to be here and love the snow, so thanks for having me here. And I do. If it didn't sound sincere, it really is. I love the snow, and it was really gorgeous. Beautiful flight from Vancouver and seeing your country. And Canadians are definitely the nicest people I have ever been around. And I'm serious. 2 days ago, I had the worst travel day I've probably had in 20 years, and I couldn't even be mad or sad because everybody was so sweet. And so I'm just really glad to be here. And so I'm the executive director of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, and the Alliance was founded by some very iconic brands and organizations who've worked in organics for a long time, and that is the Patagonia Company, very much known for their apparel division, but they also have a little-known and growing food division called Patagonia Provisions. Dr. Bronner's, they are a really lovely soap company, and they also produce other products along with the soap. And then the Rodeo Institute, a longtime organization, researcher, leader in bringing organics in the United States for about 75 years. If you could advance the next slide, please. Or do I have a clicker? Oh, here. There we go. Thank you. Don't need that. So these three brands came together about 5 years ago at the Rodeo Institute, and they all wanted to do something. They very much committed to organic in much of their product lines and in the work they did, but they saw the need for something more. And I think a lot of what led to this was in 2017 in the US, the National Organic Standards Board voted to approve hydroponics, the allowance of hydroponics in organics, and that was very problematic for some of the founders of the ROA, as well as some of the issues in organics in the US, in particular with more allowance of factory-style farms for livestock. So they came together at the Rodale Institute and they talked about what their vision was for the future of agriculture. And they saw it as something that Robert Rodale had actually talked about in the 1980s, and that is this concept of regenerative organic. And it is looking at the farm in a very holistic way, similar to the Demeter or biodynamic approach, looking at the farm in a holistic way in the appropriate context in that situation in which that farm is based, the type of soil there, the cultural practices on that farm, and really just the type of farming that contributes to the success of that farm. The regenerative practices that many are talking about these days are nothing new. They are very much adopted and adapted from indigenous peoples and from many cultures from around the world. The regenerative organic certified standard that the founders came up with was intended to incorporate all of these principles and look at this very holistic view of the farm. And this is for all the living beings on the farm. So we're talking about the health of the soil and looking at the soil microbiome in particular, building healthy soil. We're talking about animal welfare, and then we talk about social fairness for the farmers and the farm workers. And so this is an approach that is intended to encompass all the living beings on the farm, whether we're talking about the soil microbiome, the farm animals, or the workers and the farmers themselves. And so really looking at our very broken food system and a very extractive approach to agriculture and trying to turn this around and make it something that is holistic and regenerative. And so this is how they came up with these 3 pillars, which I'm not going to go into great detail on because, of course, I want to have time for Stuart to talk about how he's implementing this and Jason to talk about how he's bringing it to market. But the core of the Regenerative Organic Certified Framework are these 3 pillars here on the screen. Obviously, too much for you to read, and I'm not going to read it out loud to you, but if you'd like to go to our website, regenorganic.org, you can download the full text of the framework, and you can look into more detail of each of these core principles. And just like Doug mentioned in the previous session, this conservation tillage or minimizing soil disturbance is something that the regenerative movement, there's been a lot of debate around this. When they came out the gate with our framework, they said no-till, and everybody said that's ridiculous. So then it became conservation tillage, and now it's more of this goal of minimizing your tillage and finding other ways to terminate those cover crops in a way that don't require chemicals and poison to kill the land and the soil microbiome, but do require more innovation and other methods, other types of crops. And the Rodale Institute has been leading the way on this for many years. Jeff Moyer first introduced the roller crimper, which some of you may have heard of. I see the roller crimper being adopted in many areas and used to terminate a cover crop and allow farmers to seed directly into that and let that crop serve as a mulch to stop the weeds and preserve moisture in the ground. A lot of successes in some regions and not so many in others. So it really takes a lot of innovation and trial and error, and the need for research and support for farmers in this is tremendous. So some of those other practices are outlined here. Again, I'm not going to go into details on those in the interest of time. The animal welfare pillar is really at its core, it's about not allowing confined animal feedlot operations, not concentrating animals into some small area where you bring them the feed and then you have to deal with the manure by getting rid of it, and it becomes a pollution problem for downriver or to that land. So we have grass-fed, pasture-based animal systems where those animals get to live their lives, where they have the freedom to express their natural behaviors, and they have the ability to live their lives with those 5 core principles of animal welfare, and that is listed up there, the freedom from stress and distress and hunger and so forth. That 3rd pillar on the left is the social fairness pillar, and it's been quite an education, quite a learning For me, I worked for 20 years in organics. I was an organic inspector. One of my favorite jobs ever in my career was spending days with farmers, and my friends from the IOA right here can attest. Spent many a day with many a farmer, helping them understand the requirements of the federal rule for organic, helping them understand what they need to do to ensure that they are compliant, and ensuring for consumers that those farmers were compliant. I worked 15, 20 years doing that, and spent a lot of time with farmers. I never thought about the farm workers, honestly. It wasn't something that was part of my job. And so it's something I've really learned in this last few years about the vulnerabilities of those farm workers. Certainly in the United States, we face a lot of problems around this because at least 65% or more of the agricultural labor force on our farms, picking our food, working in our fields, are undocumented individuals. So that means they do not have the normal protections that labor law is supposed to provide and doesn't actually really provide. So there's a lot of reasons for that social pillar. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on it, but I just wanted to mention that, and any of you who would like to talk more about it, please see me. We are developing a lot of resources for training our certifiers that work with the Regenerative Organic Alliance and training the auditors who work for them. And we're also working on a guide for the farmers and for the farm workers to really help enable and educate everybody in this sector on the importance of that. We also just talked briefly about the regenerative, and what's happening with regenerative is it's another way to dust off old methods, put a shiny new term on it, and call it regenerative, but it's just more of the same. And so we are very cognizant of that at the ROA, and the founders intentionally link regenerative with organic. Organic is our baseline. We feel like organic is a very high bar. It is a hard-earned designation, and it's really important to uphold that and strengthen organic, and that's why we require it as a baseline for our program, and then we build upon that and layer upon that these other provisions in those 3 pillars that I just shared on the screen. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here. You can see on those slides kind of the difference, and the especially looking at the regenerative, where you're going to be able to see regenerative products on the market that may have grown with chemicals, agrochemicals, and also that are using GMOs. So the other part and aspect I think is really important there is there's no social fairness element to it, and there's no animal welfare element to the regenerative, any of the regenerative claims that I've seen yet, and there are quite a few. At last count, there are 7 new regenerative certifications coming to market. And so I think it's really important for all of us in the organic sector to understand that organic is really is a very strong designation, and we can build on that by adding in, layering in these additional regenerative principles and concepts. And for this, the Farmer's Road, or the road to ROC, is spelled out here for anybody who's interested. Basically, we work only with NOP accredited certifiers to do the regenerative organic certified audit. They bundle it on top of the organic audit, and this way we try to eliminate additional strain for the farmers, additional resources that you have to spend doing additional audits. We have extensive benchmark analysis that compares the different standards we recognize to the framework, so that any farmer who comes to us already certified organic, certified Global Animal Partnership, and perhaps Fair for Life, then the subsequent audit for that farm is going to be reduced by 20 or 30 control points, essentially. We do that gap analysis, and that is to try and eliminate any redundancy for the farmers and the auditors. This is where we are today. We're growing. We've done this really with 4 certifiers working with us. 2 of them are here at the conference, so I just want to shout out to ProCert and EcoCert. They have been fantastic partners to the Regenerative Organic Alliance and helping us to do this work. And we have about 250 applications in the queue. Of that, we did have a little global pandemic in the midst of launching our certification, so it did slow us down a lot, and I did not want us to get out the gate doing remote audits, and so we really tried to wait until we could have auditors go on the ground, visit with those farmers, and see what was happening on the ground, slowed us down a little bit, but as you can see, we've got nearly 100 certified farms. This represents over 33,000 smallholders. One farm in the Global South may represent 1,000 or 2,000 farmers. We are very much a global program, and a lot of interest coming in from around the world, in particular South America and India. We've also got a lot of growth happening in Africa, in Western Africa, and some coming in Australia. We've got a lot of livestock operations coming in the queue soon, so we're gonna soon see cattle and sheep on the market coming in with the Regenerative Organic certified. We've got about 50 brands now licensed to carry and use our marks, and that is a really exciting part. That's where we really feel like the growth is going to happen with a brand like Farmers Direct, selling to Whole Foods and doing the other work that they're doing is going to really help build this movement and bring these crops to market and help farmers get the recognition they need for doing the good work that they're doing and get the premiums that they deserve. And so I think this is just a show of some of the brands we're working with, and I think other than that, I'm gonna wrap it up here quickly and turn it over to Stuart to talk about what you all are probably more excited to hear about, and that is how this is working on the ground, the successes, the challenges, and other gleanings along the way. So thank you very much for your time and attention. See you soon.
Good morning. Yeah, it was been a real exciting challenge and opportunity for our farm. I mean, in 2018, we became one of the pilot farms with this. There was not many of us. We were a lone blip in the Canadian prairies. Really about the closest participant was down in Nebraska, the only one that would kind of, you could be like, yeah, I bet you their farm is somewhat similar to ours. But Nebraska and central Saskatchewan can be a bit of both physical distance as well as a contextual difference in how we grow in those regions. So our farm owners were committed to being part of the pilot, and I was quite committed to being part of this because I'd certainly heard about the Regenerative Organic Association and the Regenerative Organic Certification Program, but I think like most of you farmers or people involved in agriculture, we've been aware of the concepts around regenerative. Now, consumers may not be at that level, but I think even 5 years ago, if you asked farmers, hey, have you heard about this regenerative agriculture? You'd get a lot of nods. You know, they might, have only a vague understanding of it, but there is definitely a solid understanding within the agricultural community and the organic community that we need to perhaps go further in part of our innovation, in part of our practices. So it was exciting, but it also was a little challenging. I remember being in on one of the initial calls, talking with other pilot participants, and I was like, wow, this farmer in India has questions about the same questions that I have. I was like, okay, maybe it's not isolated to, well, how do we implement this in a Canadian context? I was like, oh, if the Indian farm also was sharing some of my farm questions or concerns, this might, be an area we need to kind of provide feedback and modify, which is why you're in a pilot. It's really exciting to see that lone blip on the Canadian prairies is actually well filled out with quite a robust number of farms that are certified here in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, and Alberta. And in fact, when I look at their farm distribution, the Canadian prairies have more farms in it than, say, the Western Corn Belt of Iowa, Minnesota, and the Nebraskas. We've got a much more uptake here. There's more producers who've seen opportunity in it and who've gotten on board with the program. So as I say, that first pilot year, it was challenging. The audit took 3 times as long as our organic audit and was about double the cost of our organic certification. And so from a farm perspective, I was like, ooh, this is gonna be a tough sell to get farmers on board with this, because we all know as organic producers the value of our organic certification. Why would we go get an add-on if it's going to cost more than organic and take double the time? Quite happy to say now, and because we realized that was a pilot. We're flying in an auditor from another part of the country. They were new to the program. I'm new to the program. I hadn't developed a lot of the requirements. I didn't even quite fully understand what the requirements were. We're all going in a little blind. Whereas now, I'm integrating my organic and my ROC audit at the same time. Yes, it takes longer than my organic audit used to, but not significantly. A couple of extra hours, and we're covering a lot more ground. But we've reduced the redundancies. Yeah, we're gonna need to go look at my inventory, look at my sales, look at my fields, look at my practices. We're gonna do that with the organic auditor anyways. We're just now doing some additional things that never happened. Interviews with all the farm staff, checking in on some other elements that might not have been done. So it's now become a much more manageable process. From a farmer, I've always said to other farms who are looking to do this, if you're already trying to implement the best practices in organics and you're willing to put in some additional time and effort, you're going to be able to do this. You know, will you hit gold in a Canadian context? Because the ROC program is similar to some other programs where it's scored in receiving a bronze requirement, a silver or gold requirement. Will you hit gold? It's going to be a challenge. I don't see our farm hitting gold. Will I like to try to get there? That's great. It's always good to have a challenge. But for those farms to get in the program, I think it's actually very doable. And in fact, it made so many other things that the farm is doing much easier. We were looking at farm safety programs, and whether you like it or not, farmers in the room, we may well be seeing requirements to actually have more farm safety plans in the future. By actually having gone through the ROC program, going through the farm safety program was actually way easier, because I was like, oh, we already have this in document. We have a policy for this. We've got it, a training that's documented. We've already instructed our workers about their right to refuse, which actually is kind of written in the law. We probably as farmers just don't tell our staff that much. So it required me to do those things. It allowed me to actually make other changes on the farms, I think, that were a little less difficult. Now, perhaps to Doug's point, have all of my implementations of things around soil health worked splendidly? No, they haven't. Not all of them. I'm committed to some of them. I'm still going to keep doing them, even though I didn't see a great benefit from integrating warm season legumes with my cool season cereals that should have provided nitrogen, they should have provided competition, they should have provided pollinator habitat, they should have increased yield. And I have no tangible benefit that I could see that, any of those things have happened, but I still see merit in continuing. The system we had some challenging growing conditions this year, so maybe it didn't work this year. It's not to say it's never going to work. Do we all have to go through trying to innovate and realize our innovations weren't always successful? Yeah, we probably do. That's not a reason to stop, though. It's never a reason to stop with those experiments. Circling back to kind of labor, there was a discussion yesterday in part of an inspectors group, and a person had asked, well, there's laws in place. How can you have all of these kind of requirements related to workers when there's laws in place? To which my answer to the person was, laws for labor in Saskatchewan and agriculture? There's no laws related to agriculture in Saskatchewan. Agriculture is exempt from most labor laws relative to construction, forestry, mining. There's no requirements. So the requirements on the ROC program, of course, they can't supersede a local law, but if there is no local law, then, you can actually have an additional requirement. And it's actually been good for us, having it written into our program that when we have youths working on the farm, that farm work shouldn't endanger their safety, that it shouldn't interfere with their education. When I had the teenager who's like wanting to come pick rocks on the night before his exam, I was like, dude, go home. Study your exam. The rocks are going to be there the next day. I don't want you coming to the farm to do, it's an important job, but not an essential job. When you go at one high school exam to write, go write to your exam, buddy. Like, no. Made me change my thoughts around my own children working on the farm. Even thinking about, a requirement that, yes, it's written in for a farm-centric program. Do we work a 38-hour work week? No. None of us do. But the work weeks that exceed 60 hours, when we're putting in that 85-hour work week in the middle of seeding, How long can you maintain an 85-hour work week throughout your growing season? At what point does it lead to burnout of all of your staff and a mutiny or depression on their part? What does it lead to your own burnout and an accident and an injury? So a requirement says, yeah, you know, your work week shouldn't exceed 60 hours per week more than 3 months out of the year. Well, I just tapped out on my 60-hour work week just in the end of October. So, you know, I did have a discussion. Well, no more 60-hour work weeks for me for the rest of November and December. So many of the requirements I find are sound. They're doable. And they've kind of led to a bit of a different approach on our farm. And you know, certainly, as they say, we're going to keep trying to innovate and have different, you know, ways of looking at this program. And I think it will be interesting to see how it evolves on a marketplace, because I think practically and pragmatically as farmers, if we don't see that market develop, it's going to be really challenging for us to try to get on board with a new program when, you know, maybe we want to just focus on organic because it's tried and true, and many of the audience here have been farming organically for a long number of years. We already know that. So I can see some reluctance around a new program, but provided there's consumer understanding and support, I think there's great merit, because the example I always use is the organic standards say we should maintain and improve soil quality. Well, honestly, as an organic inspector coming to your place, documented how you're maintaining and improving soil quality? Never. They don't do that. We have a standard written into the organic requirement that's never verified, it's never quantified. It used to be that it shall maintain and improve soil humus. Or it was like, why are we here talking about chickpea dip? It's like, you can't even measure humus. There is no, humus doesn't exist in a soil science capacity as a measure of humus. So we were required to improve humus, but you can't even measure it. Great. So at least they modified it to say soil quality. But again, there is no certification body is saying, show me how you've improved soil quality. The ROC program does. It says, all right, let's take measurements of your active and your labile carbon. What's your soil microbial respiration like? What do you, and also not just requiring us to, the thing I've really been happy with in evolution with it was not just go do more soil tests, go send them off to labs, figure out and try and see what you make sense of this, but have a series of requirements of you go out with shovel on field and you do counts that look at sort of the soil texture and aggregation. Looking at, you know, sort of number of worm castings that are out there. Become active yourself in measuring soil quality. So I think that's a bit of a shift in things that I really wanted to do, but you get too busy twisting wrenches and trying to keep the farm running, and you're like, I should really go check out, you know, how that green manure improves soil quality. Now I have to tell myself, just like my 60-hour work weeks, you're going to go out. You're going to go look at soil quality, and, well, twisting wrenches can wait for another day. So anyways, I'm curious to kind of move over a bit to hear from Jason and create opportunities for you to ask questions of us, so I'll leave it there.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. I'm going to be speaking about Regenerative certified and markets. So about 2 years ago, Whole Foods Market contacted us and said they're very interested in Regenerative certified crops and products, and could we produce them? So we went out to a number of our farmers and said, could you do this? Thankfully, because of the work we had done previously with Farmer Direct Co-op, a lot of our farmers that we're still working with were used to some of the extra certification points of ROC, you know, specifically the social welfare part of it. And so we developed a program, and we just literally launched it a number of months ago with shipping our first Regenerative certified oats to Whole Foods Market. We're doing package oats for them in 1-pound bags and also 25-pound bags to their bulk bins. So, you know, the question is like, you know, why ROC? And from a consumer's perspective, the reason for ROC is that when the USDA National Organic Program came in 2002, there was 2 specific areas that they decided that wouldn't be covered by that program. And one of them is social welfare, and the other one is animal welfare. And since 2002, as many of you have known, the NOP has been watered down by corporate lobbyists, essentially, so that they allow for certain things which organic consumers are concerned about. And specifically, the most recent one is allowing hydroponics to be certified organic. So, of course, most of you know in the room, hydroponics is soilless agriculture, and the whole point of organic agriculture is to build soil. So the fact that it's allowed in America under the NOP is another reason why there's demand for Regen Organic certification. Should note too, though, in Canada, the core Canadian organic regulation is stronger than NOP now. We don't allow hydroponics in the core regulation. A few other things too. They allow parallel production under the NOP. Parallel production is not allowed under core. But again, the U.S. market is driving this, so we can take advantage of it. Another opportunity I see for farmers with ROC and what Farmer Direct is really pushing is we feel that it's about time that there's minimum guaranteed prices in organics, and it's not going to happen under the NOP or the core. These are now controlled by government, and so to make changes that benefit farmers to these regulations will be onerous. However, ROA is very receptive, so we see them as partners that we're going to work with them to grow the standard, to make it a stronger standard for both farmers and consumers. So along with the pricing, just giving an example, for the farmers, what's the benefit of doing ROC from an economic point of view? So last year we came out with a minimum guaranteed pricing contract specifically on oats. It's a hard spec to make. We're asking for ROC gluten-free oats. But our minimum guaranteed price contract for that is $12 a bushel. So what does that essentially mean? It means that it doesn't matter what the market's doing. Market goes below $12 a bushel, we're still going to pay you $12 a bushel. If the market goes above $12 a bushel, you can come to us and say, hey, I'm being offered $15 a bushel for my oats. Will you match that? And so we either say yes or no. So it's a right of first refusal contract. The reason we're doing this is because we want to provide farmers with the confidence to plant the crop at an excellent price. And yet, if the market goes up, we don't want farmers to have to leave any money on the table. Why would we do this? Sounds kind of strange, right? Why would a company do this? The reason we're doing this is because we want more ROC acres. We want more organic acres. Things are getting more expensive. Land's getting more expensive, as you all know. Fuel, tractors, everything is getting more expensive. So if we really want farmers to stay on the land and adopt new management practices, then we have to pay you guys. That's the bottom line. So we really want to expand this, and good news that the marketplace is extremely receptive. Not only Whole Foods Market, but other brands are starting to buy ROC certified oats and legumes. We also have a private label contract with a group called Thrive Market. So it's exciting, it's taking off. So a lot of buyers and industry behind this. So we're pretty excited. Just a little bit more about the process of getting certified. We're working with EcoCert as our ROC certifier, and not every certifier in the prairies is doing ROC. So what EcoCert is doing is they'll come out to your farm and for about $800 to $1,200 do an add-on. Considering the premium that you can get for the ROC crops economically, that's well worth it. Back to the consumers and what we're trying to see, some of the variances between regular organic certification and ROC is, of course, there's no hydroponics allowed under ROC, so no soilless agriculture. So no parallel production is allowed under ROC. Under the NOP, parallel production is allowed, core it's still not. And then, of course, added social welfare and animal welfare standards. And as Stuart mentioned, really, really important one is soil testing. So every 3 years, there's mandatory soil testing For us as a buyer, we're really interested in that because I'm looking forward to, say, 10 years down the road when we literally have 10 years of data from all the farms we're working with. So we can start to work with the farmers and pinpoint what management practices are working on which farms and just share that information with the organic farmers in the community. So so that's mainly what I have to say. The market's strong, it's growing. What we're really looking for is ROC oats, lentils, any kind, beans. So those are the main crops that we're selling. And before I end, I just want to mention something, a book I'm reading. It's called The Healthy Hunza. This book was written back in 1948 by J.I. Rodale. So The Healthy Hunza, I really recommend that book. It's fascinating because it talks about the start of the organic industry with Sir Albert Howard, who went to India and he saw the incredible health of these people and figured out that the reason they were so healthy was in their farming practices and specifically how they managed their compost. And he took those farming practices back to England and he started doing things like replacing the food at a boarding school in his town with the food that he grew on his farm. And so because he was taking these composting practices from India and using them with great success in England, he found that the children, where they usually get ill every year from the various colds and flus that were going around, very topical, right, to not being diseased at all. So Sir Albert Howard and a few other scientists that did independent studies did find, which I think we all know, that when you're eating nutrient-dense food, you're healthier. You don't get diseased. And the whole basis behind nutrient-dense food is how we manage our soils, of course, which brings it back to ROC and why we really want to support it. So the markets are strong. We encourage you to go down the route of ROC. There's contact information on that slide there. If you have organic pulses or ROC pulses or grains to sell, please call Mark. If you need questions or need of a technical nature regarding ROC, please contact Marion McBride, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Marion's been doing great work at Farmer Direct for over a decade now. And then, of course, if you're a buyer and you're interested in ROC grains, please contact me. Thank you.
Any questions?
My question, I guess, first of all, I want to say super support the idea of what you're promoting. I think there's a place for it. Several personal issues with the standards, but what I want to get into is at the top of one of the first slides was something about fair payment to farmers. And tell me more. Where does that fit in?
Yeah,
Because
I'd love to.
As a farmer.
Yeah. Thanks, Doug.
Let me finish this.
Okay.
I don't think we should spend any more on certification or anything else until we get more economic fairness and income to the farm. We can't pay our
Agreed.
people anymore if we're not making anything.
100%.
We can't afford another certification if we're not making enough to afford it. So
100%.
address that.
Yep. So that is something that Patagonia and Bronner's were very keen to add on to the standard, and I didn't mention it earlier. It's at the end of our social fairness standard is a buyer's criteria, and the idea is that buyers they pay premiums to the farmers, they have long-term contracts, they help enable capacity building for the farmers. And so there's a variety of ways that the founders were doing this in the beginning in our pilot period. We saw a lot of that with Patagonia and the work they did with the cotton producers in India, as well as with the tropical fruit producers in Nicaragua. With Bronner's, we saw it at multiple places where they work around the world: Ghana, Sri Lanka, India. And it's all actually discussed in a beautiful way in the Bronner's book called Honor Thy Label. And so really we are trying to re-envision this very extractive kind of approach to to the agricultural economy. And I think it's not without pain points. We've had a lot of learnings and we've made plenty of mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes, I should say, along the way in trying to launch this program. And one of those is like in how we implement the buyer's criteria, and that's something we're focusing on now. And it's maybe a little bit late, but not too late, because so far we've just have a limited number of brands who are coming on board. And so now we're gonna really integrate this into a more formal process. When a brand gets licensed, they fill out this questionnaire and they provide that information to confirm, for us to confirm that. And so thanks for asking that question. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier.
Can I address that too? Can I
Please.
address that? Yeah. So what we're trying to do is really push and lobby ROA to adopt minimum guaranteed prices for crops, right? So just like in the with fair trade and global south, there's minimum price for coffee, sugar, products like that. And so how do we drive this? We went to our farmers and we asked them, could you go and talk to your accountants, your bookkeepers, and come up with cost of production? Okay, like how much is it actually costing you to produce oats on your farm? And what do you feel would be a fair premium? So we just took the question right back to the farmers and asked them to generate the data. Of course, it's not such a straightforward question to ask, but our farmers did work on it and they came back and we came up with a price and that they're satisfied contract and they felt was fair. And that price was about 20% premium over the current organic market. Consequently, the year that we did these contracts, the market went crazy, it went way up. But because we have these guaranteed minimum price contracts, that right of first refusal, the farmers weren't stuck with that minimum guaranteed price. They were able to capture the marketplace premium that given year. So, that's our solution to it. We're going to be lobbying ROA on that. There's precedence from the Global South with fair trade certification for this. I think it's just eventual, has to happen. For me, it's a big part of what's missing in organic certification.
It's a great point. Thanks for making that. And Stuart may want to add something here, but also we did notice that in the cotton producers in India, there was a recent survey, and I think it was 92% of them made a premium above organic, and 98% of them intended to stay in the ROC program for the foreseeable future. And those are the kind of relationships, and that's what we're trying to facilitate here at the ROA, is exactly what Jason mentioned, and just finding ways to systematize it and make this work across many sectors across the world is part of my challenge. So.
Hi, yeah, great talk, thanks for that. So, taught a class last year on sustainable food systems, and one thing that we talked a lot about was labeling in food systems and consumer perceptions of labeling. And I just wonder if that's something that you guys think about in terms of adding another label, and if there's a lot of consumer confusion on that, or even consumer exhaustion on that point, and what you guys think about that.
Yeah, so I don't really buy it, and the reason I don't really buy it is because people literally can remember 1,000 corporate logos. So, we're talking about, any given package, maybe having, 3 or 4, even 5 sustainability logos on them now, including USD organic. So I think the consumer's capacity to, recognize and understand it, that's not the issue. I think the issue is whether the consumers feel it's BS or not, right? So that's really I think that's what we're getting at. How do you make your label resonate with consumers so they believe it has integrity? But consumers are hungry for these labels, as we've seen by the market, right? I think organics is $50 billion plus now. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I wouldn't want to underestimate consumers either, and I think that consumers are really looking for something that's meaningful and that resonates with an entire suite of values they bring into the store when they go shopping. They're often busy, and they want that one label that conveys something that really meets them where they are. And there is a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of greenwashing, and that's what our job is for my program, for our program, is to get out ahead of that and ensure that people see that it's a meaningful claim and it has a lot of credibility and rigor built into it. And so I think that also is really important. If you look at the non-GMO label, that thing is everywhere on things that are never going to be a GMO, like water or whatever it is. Like there are problems with that. And so...
Are you referring to non-GMO, gluten-free organic water?
Exactly. Yeah. The vegan stuff? Yeah, that's the one. Go ahead.
Hi. I have a great interest in the organic standards doing a better job over time. The Organic Federation of Canada did a comparison between regenerative organic and organic as it exists here in Canada. And you can find that on the OFC website if you're curious, that comparison. It didn't add terrible difficulties for our farm. The requirements for regenerative, I think, were manageable in most cases. There are a few question marks that I would have. Like, for example, we feed livestock. We finish our own livestock. You may have noticed when you encountered the snow that there's no grass to be grazed in Saskatchewan at this time of year. Yep. I don't feel that it's any hardship for our livestock at all, that they're in a confined circumstance where they're fed organic hay, they're bedded on organic straw, and we provide water, liquid, rather than the white solid stuff. So with a few exceptions like that, I didn't think our farm would have much difficulty complying with the ROA standard. And I have to admit that I'm an admirer of an organic standard that takes more recognition of global warming, greenhouse gas emissions, and our responsibility to do a better job with that. Although I would submit that organics does a good job with that. For example, we use no synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, and synthetic nitrogen fertilizer is responsible, it's the biggest piece in conventional agriculture adding to greenhouse gas emissions. So just to get where I wanted to go here, my real concern about the extra standard, and I know you've just addressed this, but my real concern is that it shouldn't devalue the organic standard. We worked very hard to establish that. We still have difficulty. Here in Canada, we have great difficulty with government treating us as just another brand. For example, the Canadian organic standards have to be reviewed every 5 years. That's done by government financing in the United States. It's government financing in all of Europe. It's government financing in Japan. But here, no, it isn't. Nor is there any way for the industry to self-finance that review. So I'm just concerned that the organic standard does continue to be valued. It's really important that ROA doesn't devalue that.
I will reiterate again, thank you for your comments. The reason that our name is Regenerative Organic Alliance is because we do uphold and believe in the organic standard, and that's why we require it as a baseline, and we always will. So there's no doubt about that. That said, there are issues with a federal rule, certainly in the U.S. For example, the organic livestock provision that just was brought back after 15 years within the industry of trying to improve and add animal welfare standards, and what they did was offer organic poultry operators a 3 to 15-year transition to letting those chickens outside. That's not okay. And so that's why the Regenerative Organic Certified standard exists and presents, and it builds upon and gives an alternative to consumers to get something that is going to meet their values in that way. And I do also, just to reflect on your personal situation, we certainly allow for animal operations that are in northern climates where the animals do need to be inside and being fed hay produced on site or silage or something produced on that farm. So thank you for your comments. Any other?
My question would be a lot easier to answer than Jim's. I got two practical questions. First, it's organic ROC standard. Like if I don't have livestock on my farm, am I going to be certifying and continue to progress to silver or gold in the future?
Quick answer, yes. We have no livestock. So our farm is a straight grain farm. We have a couple of partners that cattle farming partners we'd like to kind of expand more with. That remains more of a long-term goal, but right now we have no livestock and we're still at silver.
So that means the three pillars, they are operated independently, is that right?
You have to have the animal welfare if you have commercial livestock on farm. So if you're selling the
Oh yeah, I lied. I've got 6 chickens. So
commercial meaning like a commercial enterprise compared to your other farm income, that it represents a more significant portion of the farm income. We want to encourage animals to be incorporated back into the farm. And so there is not a requirement for those livestock, domestic animals, for example, that need to be in that program.
So how about the third pillar, like the fairness too?
That's required.
That's required.
Yeah, always.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question about the trade of ROC's products. Indian doesn't have this kind of equivalency agreement with Canada, and is those kind of ROC certifying product could come to Canada without this kind of equivalence agreement?
They have to meet NOP or international equivalent. So, for example, if they EU organic as well. And so I know there's been some issues in India, certainly in the last year or so, but those are addressed through the certifiers who work in those regions doing that gap analysis.
So in that, does that mean the ROC is operated beyond the organic? I mean, it's independently, not really have to follow. I mean, in Canada, if we do the fair trade with Indian and organic logos, we have to follow this kind of equivalency agreement?
Yep.
You mean that ROC doesn't have to follow that?
We require that there is an international equivalent for the NOP, that they have an organic certificate that reflects that.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the questions. I just thought, as I was reflecting on both presentations, there's kind of a through line between the two, and that's about systems thinking and whole farm thinking and reimagining the food system, really. And I think that if we're going to face the many challenges that we're facing, whether it's, I don't know, climate, conflict, there's probably another C in there somewhere, that are having an impact on what we're doing right here in Saskatchewan and across the prairies. We do need to be thinking differently about what we're doing. And so thank you for your offerings today, and thank you, Elizabeth, Stuart, and Jason, for your presentations.